Today on One Man Garage, doing a little Chevy style valve adjustment on the Pontiac 455 budget build. Already using some PRW 1.5 roller tip rockers that I picked up, good deal, new in the box, second hand local deal on the old marketplace. Didn't like the threads on the lock nuts that came with it, so I actually went with some good old school Elgin Pro Stock big block Chevy crimp stock style nuts, and this has big block Chevy 7/16 studs converted. You know, your stock Pontiac is still 7/16 stud on the bottom and where the pivot is, so all your stock rockers on a Pontiac are 7/16, but the bottleneck stud that torques down goes down to 3/8 threads where the lock nut is, but it's 7/16 where the pivot ball is. So like say you had stock studs on these heads, you could still put the same roller rockers on and just use a 3/8 small block Chevy 350 crimp nut on the 3/8 bottleneck top of a Pontiac 7/16 stud, and these rockers fit that just the same as these full 7/16 studs. You know, all your strength is at the pivot point down. The 3/8 lock nut on top really has, I don't know that there's really even a benefit on any of that, to be honest, going to the big block Chevy stud. It seems kind of silly, but never mind all that minutia. Here is the Chevrolet Chilton book firing order to adjust which valves on a V8 when you're number 1 top dead center firing versus number 6 top dead center firing, which, by the way, everybody that keeps having the backfire distributor 180 out every time they do their fire up on their engine after they've been working on it, it's because you're doing your timing chain dot to dot with the cam dot down to where they're close together, but that dot down on the cam gear is actually number 6 top dead center firing, and people just kind of forever keep thinking that's number 1 firing, but number 1 top dead center firing, which is 180 out for number 6, your cam dot will be up. It's 12 o'clock. Cam dot up and crank dot up is number 1 firing. When the cam dot is down and the crank dot's up at number 6 to number 12, then you're on number 6. So that's why everybody's always 180 out on their crank up. So I've gotten a quarter turn from getting 0 lash out on the number 1 top dead center settings. Of course, you could see the rockers that were up, you know, like the number 3 and 4 were up, so it was obviously number 6 because they would have been down in level, you know, like number 1. So we're fixing to rotate her over and do the other half. Well, got the second adjustment done at a half turn from 0 lash, and fixing to turn it back over to its back to number 1 firing position. It's something to, when you're working on valve adjustment or working on a motor with valve covers off, especially if it's a press stud like an old small block Chevy or a 2-barrel or small valve Pontiac, you want to look at the threads above the nut and make sure they look the same all the way across, because they should be the same, barring any kind of mechanical variation. You know, you should be able to basically just kind of glance at the look at like how many threads above the nut. Should be the same all the way around, because say you're setting the valves and you think you got them right and one's different, you know, you might have a stud that's pulling out, or you have something else going on that could be worse. But anyway, just something to keep an eye on. You should have consistent thread count above the nut all the way around. Well, I haven't put those valve covers on yet because the had to double check the previous abusive owner that over torqued the valve covers, just like on a small block Chevy, same on a Pontiac. You over tighten it and mushroom down, you know, the sheet metal. So I'm working on hammering those straight. But went ahead and stuck the oil pump on. Got some flat washers and new bolts, 3/8 thread. There was a hardened pump shaft. It has a limiter that keeps it from falling out the distributor hole, so it'll stay on. And criticize or not, my little crappy welder splatter make it happen, or Dirt Dot 300 wasn't working as badly or at all as semi-good as it used to. So I have also used JB Weld to keep the pump screen from falling out. So this time it was JB Weld a while back. So it works. Criticize all you like. Don't care. This is a volunteer job, not a paid job. But no, it works for real. So next, I guess we're gonna maybe double check torque, because I did this like in 2021. But I know I torqued it, but I might check one or two just before I put the windage tray on, you know? Because Pontiac's has this tube down the side, and you got a little slip fit tube goes into the windage tray, and when you bolt the windage tray down to these 4 bolt holes, it'll anchor the lower dipstick tube, which will kick it towards the sump. So that's next. Well, got the lower dipstick and the windage tray on, 1/4 bolts with hardened washers. Put a little gear oil down the pickup tube while it was upside down, and spun the gear around and pulled it into the gears to kind of pre-lube the pump with the thick stuff. So that's all good. I guess we could put the pan on. And for you new to Pontiacs, the best core engine to build is a 73 or 74 400, because it has dual pattern motor mounts like this. Like the old cars had the saddle mount here or the 3 bolt here. So 70 to 76 engines have double mounts, but 75 they started using a lighter block casting. And in 73 and 4, they had started in 73 a baffled oil pan, and 74 and prior, the older ones, all had windage trays. So 73 and 74 have baffled oil pans and a windage tray. So that's the tip. They did away with the windage tray in 75 and got cheap. They still had the baffled pan, so you want to use a 73 to 79 pan on any of your builds if you're able to. And if you're just wanting a stroker motor or just a 400 to build, do a 73 or 4 block. You get both the pan and the tray, and it's the strong block that, you know, it's really the best block. And it has a double pattern motor mount, so it'll work in a second Gen F body, or it'll go work back to a 59 to 79 model Pontiac. Actually 59 to 81 up through the 265 and 301. So it's a lot of interchangeability. So best block, 73 and 4. Another one of those Rock Auto purchases of just a Pontiac oil pan set by itself. Nice to have. Well, here's the part when you start feeling good, coming towards the milestone on a project. At least the pan is on. I had a couple of these oil spreaders when I was cleaning through my multiple messy piles of Pontiac junk, and got the correct Pontiac flanged head 7/16 socket 5/16 thread bolts. Pontiacs have the nice flanged bolts on the valve covers and the oil pan, and you want to use the spreaders. And had to revert to the old Felpro cork oil pan gasket. This was an earlier pan, because your 60s motors had a cork. Kind of hard to set it in place. The silicone, it tries to straighten out on the cap. You got to put it on the cap, and the gaskets go on the block, and whatever. There's like 3 different oil pan rear seals. So anyways, had to use a couple longer bolts in the front because some of the aluminum threads were weak. So used a little bit longer 5/16 and flat washers to catch some virgin territory, tighten up. But that's all good, so it's almost time to pre-oil. Gonna flip her back over. Well, got the valve covers on. Had to do quite a bit of beating to unmushroom the flat surfaces and coax them back. So just, even though most, maybe but it's easy to forget that step when you're pulling steel covers on and off. Man, you gotta check on your the warpage from being over tightened in the past, so otherwise your stuff will leak. So all these were beat flat, And you know, these were more freebie parts off some other motor. And well, anywho, I don't have oil to do the pre-oil today, but I'm going to work forward and put this Victor valley pan gasket on and get this valley pan, which is actually 73 to 79 EGR valve correct, even though there won't be an EGR valve. It's a 76 Pontiac this is going in though. Same year as the 6X heads, except these are 77 heads. Actually, probably off the 78, but whatever. Anyway, 901 455, replacing a 260 olds. Should be noticeable. Anyway, back at it. Got the silicone kind of holding this in place, trying to get the bottom edge of the cork close to the bottom edge of the head. And then I already cleaned this cover in a bunch of power, purple power or ZEP, whatever, purple light-based degreaser. So anyway, we just lay that on there. Well, kind of decided after finding the bolts for the valley pan, you know, a lot of times you got to kind of hammer the edge of the valley pan or the corners because they get bent up when you pull them off. So I kind of hammered around the edges, and just to make sure there's no water leaks or anything, I put a little silicone along the outer seam and threw some paint over it to hide that. But anyway, Mr. Gasket Ultra Seal 5848 standard Pontiac port height with the big block off. That helps also if you're using a 71 and older iron intake, 65 to 71 iron intake with 72 to 79 OEM heads, because there's a dead spot there that causes a mismatch if you use the earlier intake on the later heads. That's why the gasket stock ones are different. So anyway, with Ultra Seal, Mr. Gasket 5848 takes care of that. Blocks the heat riser, keep your intake cool and more horsepower. So I gotta go see if the RPM intake's clean enough to lay on here. We're gonna call it quits for today. Got that intake just sort of mocked up on there, a couple bolts in it, but probably gonna pull it back off and clearance the bolt holes a little bit. May just be the heads being surfaced, but it's just a little tight getting all the bolts started. Typical on aftermarket. Looks like I got to use header bolts for some of them so you can't use the stock bolts except in the front. So anyway, pretty happy where I'm at today. And messy garage, work getting done.